teenager suffers cardiac arrest during swimming practice. Doctors manage to revive her, but she enters a state in which she is conscious inside, unable to move or speak, appearing lifeless to those who see her from the outside, until something happens that leaves everyone in shock. The shy sun peeked out from behind the mountains, illuminating the simple streets of the small town where Grace and her children Ethan and Emily lived. The humble but full of life reflected a family that, despite their losses, bravely persevered. In the kitchen, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sound of laughter. "Mom, don't exaggerate," said Emily as she gathered her long black hair into a ponytail. "Exaggerate?" replied Grace with a tired but proud smile. "My girl, you are the pride of this house." Grace paused, swallowing the tears that wanted to come out. David would be so happy. The father's name, always mentioned with care, was a reminder of the unspoken promise that weighed on Emily, to be strong for him. Grace approached, adjusted her daughter's jacket, and held her face gently. "Emily, you know how much you mean to us, right? No matter what happens, you will always be our light." "I know, Mom, and I'm going to win this competition. I'll do it for both of us." Those words were firm, but they hid something Emily would never admit, a pressure that she carried silently within her. As she left the house, the cold morning wind caressed her face. She looked up at the sky as if waiting for a sign. Deep down, she had a nagging doubt. What if she fails? Grace, watching her daughter walk away, murmured to herself, "Don't let her give up. David needs to know she's not alone." Emily walked toward practice while Grace remained at the door, staring into space. The muffled sound of the water was like a distant echo as Emily got ready at the edge of the pool. The coach whistled, and she took a deep breath, feeling her heart beating hard in her chest. "Today, I can do this. Today, I will overcome this," she thought, closing her eyes. For a moment, she threw herself into the water with a burst of energy, her body cutting through the water with precision. The outside world disappeared, replaced by the silent dance of bubbles around her. With each stroke, she imagined her father's face, her mother's pride, and the promise she had made that morning. But suddenly, something was wrong. Her vision blurred, her arms grew heavier, and a growing discomfort invaded her chest. But she ignored it. "Just a few more meters. I can do it." She tried to stay focused, but one small, fatal mistake changed everything. Disoriented, she misjudged the distance and felt the hard, icy impact of her head, the wall of the pool. The blow was like thunder in the midst of silence. A sharp pain spread, and her legs began to fail. "What's happening?" she tried to think, but the world around her began to fade. The blue of the pool darkened, the edges seemed distant, and an unbearable weight took hold of her body. With empty lungs and a failing heart, Emily felt life slipping away through her fingers like sand carried away by the current. And then, at the last moment, a memory appeared. Grace's voice, full of love and concern, telling her that morning, "You will always be our light," was the last thing she heard before everything disappeared. Outside, the silence of the pool was broken by a desperate cry. "Stay with me, Emily." The coach and her teammates all rushed over, but for an eternal moment, her body floated lifeless, a mystery that no one knew if there was still a solution. At home, Grace felt an inexplicable sensation that something was wrong. "Please, God, protect my little girl," she whispered, not knowing that the worst was happening. Emily's body was pulled from the water, her lips already beginning to turn blue. The coach stood by her side, her hands trembling. The coach began CPR, while the other swimmers watched, frozen in shock and fear. "Breathe, Emily, breathe," she shouted, her voice breaking with each frustrated attempt. The sirens of the paramedics sounded in the distance, bringing a mixture of hope and despair. When the rescuers finally arrived, they took control, working against the clock to save the young woman. The sound of the defibrillator broke the air, each electric shock a cruel reminder of the fragility between life and death. "Weak pulse, but she's here," said one of the paramedics. Meanwhile, Grace's phone rang at home. Grace, who was finishing washing the dishes, felt her heart race for no reason. She answered, and the coach's trembling voice broke the silence. "Mrs. Grace, something happened to Emily." She had an accident during training. She's on her way to the hospital. Grace didn't ask for details. She couldn't. The phone fell from her hands, and she ran out of the house with her thoughts spinning like a whirlwind. What happened? Is she okay? Why didn't I listen carefully to what she said? As she ran through the streets of town, each step seemed to weigh a ton. Memories of Emily as a child flashed before her eyes. The first time she entered the pool, the proud smile when she won her first medal, the promise that morning at the hospital. The doors swung open, and Grace, her face covered in tears, rushed in screaming, "My daughter! Where is my daughter?" The doctors prevented her from entering the emergency room, but she managed to see through a small window Emily's motionless body as a medical team fought to bring her back to life. "Please, God, hear me. Don't take my little girl away. She has so much to live for, so much to dream about. I'll do anything, but don't take her away." In the hallway, the clock seemed cruel, marking every second that felt like an eternity. Grace sat on the floor, hugging her knees, her muttering prayers as tears fell uncontrollably. On the other side of the door, Emily's body was an enigma. Grace, clutching the ring she had worn since the day she lost her husband, whispered in a low voice, "David, if you can hear me, help our daughter. She needs us. She needs you." On the other side, Emily's heart monitor beeped for the first time in minutes, as if responding to a silent call. The heart monitor emitted a faint but steady sound, like a light flickering in the darkness. They managed to stabilize the girl, but the emergency room was filled with unbearable tension. Her body remained motionless, as if the effort to live had drained her of all strength. Outside, Grace received permission to enter. Trembling, she walked slowly to the stretcher where her daughter lay. When she saw Emily with her pale skin and tubes connected to her face, something inside Grace broke. It was as if the girl who had so often run, swam, and laughed was now far away, trapped in a place Grace did not know how to reach. "My girl," she whispered, her voice trembling. Grace took her daughter's cold hand, caressing her delicate fingers, the same ones that had held her school diploma last year, the ones that had so often held her face in tight hugs. Tears began to fall, clouding Grace's vision as she knelt by the bed. "Please, my love, come back to me. Remember the promise we made. Always together, always fighting. I'm here, my girl. Don't leave me." The constant sound of the machines was deafening, a reminder that time seemed to be running against her as Grace cried. The doctor's words echoed in her mind. "We managed to stabilize her heart, but she hasn't woken up. We need to wait to understand the magnitude of what is happening." Wait. That word was cruel. How could she wait while her daughter fought for her life? How could she accept that all she could do was stand there helplessly? She leaned toward Emily and began to whisper, "Did you know, Emily, that your daddy said you were like a ray of sunshine? You brought light to everything. Now I need your light, my daughter. I don't know how to go on without it." Grace's tears fell on Emily's hand, but she remained motionless. Outside the room, Dr. Morales watched the scene. His hardened eyes revealed nothing, but inside him, something was beginning to change. He recognized that pain, that desperation. Grace somehow reminded him of himself at a time he was struggling to forget. Will she wake up? The question that lingered in Grace's mind and that of the doctors remained unanswered. But one thing was clear: Emily's heart was fighting. Although her mind remained silent as Grace squeezed her daughter's hand, a single tear rolled down her cheek. "You've always been strong, my girl. Be strong again." Emily's face was motionless. The monitor showed a weak but persistent pulse. The hospital room was silent, except for the rhythmic sound of the machines monitoring Emily. The doctors had allowed Grace to stay by her daughter's side during the night, and she was there, holding Emily's hand, reciting prayers punctuated by sighs. Suddenly, something happened. Emily's eyelids fluttered slightly, as if trying to open. "Emily!" Grace jumped up, her heart racing. "My love, I'm here." For a moment, Grace believed the miracle had happened. "You're back, my girl. You're back," Grace whispered, as tears ran freely down her face. But soon, hope turned into heavy silence. Emily did not react. Her body did not move. Not even her lips formed a word. "Why don't you talk to me, daughter?" Grace asked, her voice full of pain. Inside, Emily screamed desperately. She heard everything: her mother's words, the footsteps in the hallway, even the distant murmur of the doctors. But nothing in her body responded. She tried to move her fingers, open her mouth, anything to show that she was still there. But it was like being trapped in an invisible cocoon while the world continued without her. In the hallway, the doctors talked, believing that Grace couldn't hear them. "She's in a state of catalepsy," said Dr. Morales in his usual direct tone. "It's hard to say if she'll recover." Grace heard them and ran toward them, her face marked by pain and determination. "Of course she'll recover. My daughter is here, I can feel it. She's fighting. I know it." The doctors exchanged uncertain glances, but said nothing to each other. Emily's body's silence was a mystery, and the chances of improvement seemed remote. Back in the room, Grace held her daughter's face. "If you can hear me, move a finger, a muscle, anything. Give me a sign, my love." Emily wanted to scream, to cry, to say she could hear her, but all she could muster was a wave of despair that squeezed her heart. "How can I tell her I'm here? How can I make my mom understand?" Deep in her mind, a memory surfaced, the promise she had made to her dad, the desire to never give up inside her cocoon of silence. Emily vowed she would find a way to communicate, to show that there was still life inside her. Outside, Grace began telling stories from Emily's childhood, as she had done when she was little. The familiar sound of her mother's voice brought her a little relief, like a lamp being turned on. In the darkness, the hospital room seemed like a prison of unfulfilled hopes. Grace spent her days by Emily's bedside, refusing to accept the cold verdict of the doctors. "It's possible that she can't hear, that she can't feel." Grace interrupted. "My daughter is here. I know her. I know she hears me." With the determination of a mother who refuses to give up, Grace established a routine. Every morning, she took her youngest son to school and rushed to the hospital. When she entered the room, she brought stories from the past with her. "Do you remember, my girl? When you were 8 years old, you were so excited to swim for the first time, you didn't even care about the cold water." Grace smiled, but her voice broke in the middle of her sentences, between laughter and sobs. She held Emily's hands, hoping to feel a squeeze, a sign, anything that would show that her girl was listening inside. Emily listened. Every word. Her mother's voice was like an anchor in a sea of silence. She wanted to respond, to say she was there, but the prison of her own body prevented her. "I'm here, Mom! Please don't give up!" she screamed in her mind, but there was no sound. In a moment of desperation, Grace leaned over her daughter's chest, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Please, my love, give me a sign. Show me that there is still hope deep inside your soul." Emily gathered all the strength she had. She didn't know how, but she needed to find a way to reach Grace. Then, in the corner of her eye, a single tear formed, but it was too small to roll down her face. Grace, her eyes still closed, didn't see it. She continued telling stories, believing that love was stronger than any diagnosis. Outside the room, Dr. Morales watched in silence. There was something about Grace's despair that reminded him of his own pain, his own loss. He shook his head as if trying to push the thought away, and continued on to his next appointment. Inside the room, Grace picked up a photo album and began to show it to Emily. "Do you remember this day? It was your first medal. You were so happy. I was too, my love." Grace's face was full of hope, while Emily's tear, with her eyes closed, reflected the dim sunlight coming through the window in the small family home. The emptiness Emily left behind was like a hole that no one could fill. Every moment seemed to revolve around her: the daily visits to the hospital, the conversations about the diagnoses, Grace's tears amid that whirlwind of emotions. Ethan, Emily's younger brother, began to disappear, sitting alone at the table during dinner. Ethan played with the food on his plate, having no appetite. Grace barely noticed his presence, always rushing to return to the hospital that night. As Grace got up to leave, Ethan tried to stop her. "Mom, can I talk to you?" "Sure, son, but it has to be quick. Your sister is waiting for me." He hesitated. How could he compete with that? He thought, then shook his head and replied, "Nothing. It's not important." Grace kissed his forehead quickly and walked out the door. Ethan stood there feeling the weight of something he didn't know how to express, the feeling that somehow he was to blame for what had happened at school. Ethan began to distance himself from his friends. He didn't know how to explain what he was feeling. At night, he would lock himself in his room, looking at the only photo he had of Emily, taken on his birthday. In the picture, she was hugging him tightly with a big smile on her face. It was hard to believe that the cheerful, lively sister was now trapped in a body that didn't respond. He knew it. He wondered, does she know I wasn't there for her that day? She blames me. In reality, Ethan didn't know how to process the torrent of emotions he was feeling. Abandonment, guilt, jealousy, and above all, the fear of losing the only person who had always believed in him. In a moment of rage and despair, he took the photo and threw it on the floor. The glass shattered, but the sound echoed emptily in the silent house. Across town, at the hospital, Grace didn't notice that something was wrong with her son. All she saw was Emily lying motionless, and the crushing weight of certainty. But Ethan knew he couldn't go on like this. He needed answers. One day, as he walked to the hospital, he promised himself, I'm going to talk to her. Even if she doesn't listen to me, I'll tell her I'm sorry. I'll tell her I'm here. However, Ethan stopped on his way to the hospital as he wandered the streets. At the hospital, Dr. Morales walked through the hallways with firm steps and a rigid, almost impassive expression. He was known for his competence, but also for his coldness. To the other doctors and nurses, he was someone who never let himself be affected by the cases he treated. But Grace, with her attentive mother's gaze, noticed something else. He rarely looked directly at Emily, almost as if avoiding looking at her was a protection against something he didn't want to face. "Doctor, my daughter is here. She's fighting," said Grace, her voice trembling but firm as she held his arm. Morales hesitated for a second, but quickly regained control. "I understand your pain, Mrs. Grace, but we need to be realistic. Her condition is serious." Grace felt the coldness of those words, like a knife in her heart, but she refused to give up. "Realistic? How can you talk about reality when you don't even see her as a person?" "She's my daughter, doctor, not just a case." Dr. Morales's gaze wavered for a brief moment, and, without saying anything, left the room. Grace stood there frustrated, unable to understand how someone could be so distant in such a painful situation. What Grace didn't know was that, deep down, Emily's struggle awakened an old pain in Dr. Morales, something he had buried deep inside years ago. He had lost his own daughter, Lily, in a similar accident. He too had held a cold hand. He too had prayed for a miracle that never came. For Morales, every faint heartbeat on Emily's monitor was an echo of what he had lost. He had decided that he would never again let his emotions interfere, that he would never again allow himself to feel. But Grace, with her strength and determination, was beginning to break down those barriers. Later, Morales was alone in the hospital cafeteria, staring at an untouched cup of coffee. His mind wandered back to the past, to Lily's smiling face, to the sound of her laughter. He remembered the words he had been unable to say, the regrets that haunted him. The idea of having hope terrified him as much as he remembered his own loss. In the silence of Emily's room, Grace sat on the floor surrounded by her daughter's belongings. After weeks in the hospital, this was the first moment she allowed herself to touch Emily's things, a mixture of pain and the need to feel closer to her. Every object she held brought back a vivid memory: the medal from the last swimming competition, a scarf that Grace herself had knitted, a photograph with Emily's father smiling on her graduation day. As she moved her hand inside Emily's bag, a small notebook fell out. It was a diary with a simple, worn cover. Grace hesitated. Emily had always been very secretive about her writing, but something in that moment seemed to ask her to open it with trembling hands. Grace began to flip through the pages. The first entries were lighthearted, describing competitions, laughter with friends, happy moments. But as she progressed, the words began to change. The tone became heavier, the sentences shorter, as if Emily were carrying something she couldn't share. And then Grace found the page. The handwritten words seemed to scream at her. "I want to be free, but I'm afraid of failing. Grace read the sentence over and over as tears ran down her face. Free from what? Fear of failing, how she had unknowingly imposed something on her daughter. "My love, what were you trying to tell me?" Grace whispered, hugging the diary to her chest. At that moment, a wave of guilt washed over her. Grace remembered the times she had unintentionally pressured Emily to be the best, to carry on her father's legacy. Perhaps in her attempt to keep David's memory alive, she had forgotten to ask what really made Emily happy. But the diary also brought up another question. Why didn't Emily share this before? She felt alone, even surrounded by love. With the diary in her hands, Grace returned to the hospital, determined. "I'm going to understand you, daughter. I promise you. No matter how long it takes, I'm going to find a way to bring you back." Inside the room, next to the bed, Grace began to read aloud passages from the diary, as if Emily's words could reach her on the other side. Trapped in her own body, Emily listened to her mother reading her most intimate thoughts. A new feeling arose in her chest, fear mixed with a deep desire to finally be understood. Grace closed the diary and took Emily's hand tightly, looking at her intently. "No matter what you felt, I'm here. We'll find a way together, my love." The soft morning light streamed through the bedroom window, illuminating Emily's pale face. Grace, as she did every day, stood beside her, holding a damp towel to wipe her forehead and smooth the strands of hair that had fallen out of place. Every gesture was slow, almost ritualistic, as if by caring for her daughter's body, she could reach her soul. "You look calmer today, my love," Grace whispered, trying to hide the weight in her voice as she carefully wiped Emily's face. Something caught her attention. Grace paused, frowning, sure that her eyes were deceiving her, but they weren't. There it was, a single tear running down the corner of Emily's eye. "Emily!" Grace called, almost in a whisper, her voice trembling. Grace moved closer, watching her daughter's face intently, looking for any other sign, anything. Grace touched the tear with her fingers, feeling the moisture against her skin. "You're here. I knew you were here," she exclaimed, her voice charged with emotion, hope burning in her chest. Grace ran out into the hallway, calling the doctors with all her strength. "Dr. Morales, nurses, come quickly, my daughter is responding." When Dr. Morales arrived in the room, accompanied by 2 nurses, Grace pointed to Emily's face with a mixture of euphoria and tears. She cried. A tear fell from her eye. "This means something, right?" Morales looked at Emily, then at the monitor recording her vital signs, and shook his head slightly, maintaining a neutral expression. "Mrs. Grace, it's possible that it's just a reflex. The body still reacts in ways we cannot control or interpret as consciousness." He did not interrupt her. With a firm voice, he said, "It's not just a reflex. I saw it. I felt it." Dr. Morales sighed, unable to find the right words to break that mother's determination. "We're going to monitor her, but we can't jump to conclusions." Grace watched as they left, but something inside her refused to accept that explanation. That tear was a sign. She was sure of it. Back at the bedside, Grace took Emily's hand again, bringing her face close to hers. "I saw you, my girl. I know you're trying to come back to me. No matter what they say, I'm not giving up." Tears began to roll down Grace's face as she spoke, but her voice was firm, full of love and hope. In the silence of the room, inside the motionless body, Emily heard every word her mother said. The tear that had escaped was the reflection of an internal battle, a desperate effort by her mind and heart to break through the invisible barrier that separated her from the world at that moment. Grace decided she would no longer wait passively. That tear was the beginning of something, and she would do everything possible to discover what her daughter was trying to tell her. Grace's hand held Emily's tightly as the sunlight illuminated them both, symbolizing a new flame of hope that was beginning to shine. Night had fallen over the hospital, but Grace remained by Emily's side, refusing to leave. The dim light from the lamp illuminated her daughter's serene and motionless face, while Grace, with her hands resting on her forehead, tried to find an answer to what seemed impossible. She looked at the photograph she always carried with her, an image of Emily smiling next to her father, holding a swimming trophy. It was a memory of simpler times, but also a painful reminder of everything she seemed to have lost. Suddenly, An idea came to her, as clear as sunlight. If she could record every moment, perhaps if she couldn't perceive signs in the heat of the moment, a camera could capture something that human eyes couldn't see. Grace hurriedly opened her bag and took out her cell phone. Her hands trembled as she set up the camera to record. "My girl, if you're here, if you can hear me, I need a sign, no matter how small. I'm not giving up on you." She positioned the cell phone so that it could capture Emily's face and pressed the button to start recording. "I'm going to show everyone that you're still here with me," Grace whispered, her voice broken by a mixture of hope and despair. During subsequent visits, Grace recorded every moment as she cleaned Emily's face, told stories from her childhood, and read excerpts from the newly found diary. "Look at this, my love," she said, Grace holding Emily's favorite medal in front of the camera. "This was the medal you won last year. Remember how happy you were?" Inside her paralyzed body, Emily felt every word. It was like a light breeze in the midst of the darkness that surrounded her. She wanted to respond. She wanted to shout that she was there, but she still didn't know how. Days passed, and Grace obsessively analyzed every video she recorded, looking for any movement, any sign that Emily was trying to communicate. One early morning, as Grace was watching yet another recording on her cell phone, something caught her attention. She paused the video and enlarged the image, almost without breathing. "Wait." Her eye blinked. "Was it a reflex or something else?" she murmured anxiously. Grace's heart began to beat fast. She ran to Emily's room, took her cell phone, and showed the video to the nurses and Dr. Morales. "Look, I knew it." She blinked. "Look, this isn't a reflection." Morales watched the video carefully, his expression remaining unreadable. After a few seconds of silence, he finally replied, "It could be an involuntary movement, but it could also be something else. We'll do more tests." Although Morales' words were cautious, Grace felt a spark of hope growing inside her. "You're coming back with me, daughter. I know it," whispered Grace, as she took Emily's hand again, the cell phone still recording every moment in the hope that the next sign would come soon. The pale morning light illuminated Grace's tired face as she held Emily's diary once more, searching for answers in her daughter's words. She reread a sentence that marked her deeply. "Water has always been my refuge. It's where I feel free." But feeling the weight of those words, Grace began to remember. Emily always said that in the water, the world seemed to disappear. There was no pressure, no fear, just her and the deep silence. Grace smiled, even though her eyes were filled with tears as she imagined her daughter swimming with her natural grace, as if she were made for that element. Maybe, just maybe, water could help her now, Grace murmured to herself with a new idea. Grace took a small glass container, filled it with crystal clear water, and sealed it carefully. All the way to the hospital, she held the container as if it were a treasure, determined to use this meaningful object to try to reach Emily's mind. Upon entering her daughter's room, Grace sat down next to the bed and placed the container of water on the nightstand. "Carefully, my child," she began, her voice low and full of emotion. "I brought something you always loved. Remember how you used to say that water was your refuge? Maybe it can help you now." Gently, Grace placed the container in Emily's hands. Although they were motionless, she adjusted her daughter's fingers around the glass, as if she wanted Emily to feel the presence of the object, even if only unconsciously. "If you can hear me, use this to show me that you're still here, my love." Grace began to tell stories about the pool, describing how Emily used to laugh as a child, kicking the water hard and splashing everyone around her. "You always said you wanted to be like a mermaid. Remember your strength, your courage. They have always been so inspiring, and I know that strength is still within you, even now." For hours, Grace stayed by Emily's side, holding the bowl, talking to her, and waiting for any sign. At the end of the day, as she adjusted Emily's pillow, something unexpected happened. The water inside the bowl began to move slightly, almost imperceptibly. Grace stopped, holding her breath. She looked at Emily's hand and saw that for a brief moment there seemed to be a slight tension in her fingers. Grace called out to Emily, her voice trembling. The movement stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Grace called the nurses and Dr. Morales, but when they arrived, everything seemed exactly as it had been before. "It was just your imagination, Mrs. Grace," Morales said in his usual tone. "It wasn't my imagination. I know what I saw." "It was the water," Grace insisted, pointing to the bowl. Morales looked at the bowl, but nothing indicated anything out of the ordinary. He shook his head in disbelief and left. Alone again, Grace took her daughter's hand and rested her forehead on it. "No matter what they say, I know you're here. I felt it. I know you're fighting inside your silence." Emily felt an echo. It was as if the water had touched something deep inside her, something she couldn't even understand. The night was silent in the hospital. The sound of the machines was the only background music in Emily's room. Grace, tired but full of hope, decided to place the bowl of water near her daughter's bed. Once again, the crystalline surface reflected the dim light of the lamp, creating small sparkles that seemed to dance in the air. "My girl, I'm doing everything I can. Please show me you're here," Grace whispered, delicately holding Emily's hand as she adjusted the bowl. Something unexpected happened. Emily's hand trembled slightly, like a faint but visible reflex. Grace opened her eyes wide and brought her hands to her mouth, trying to contain the emotion that overwhelmed her. "Emily, it was you. Please do it again." But this time the movement did not repeat itself. The room returned to its usual silence. But for Grace, that moment was enough to ignite a new flame of hope. At that moment, the door to the room slowly opened, revealing Ethan, Emily's younger brother, who had begun to avoid the hospital. He had come to look for Grace at the request of a nurse, but when he entered, he saw his mother leaning over the bed, overcome with emotion. "Mom, what happened?" Ethan asked in a low, almost fearful voice. Grace turned quickly, her eyes filled with tears. Ethan's hand moved. He frowned skeptically. Ethan had stopped going to the hospital because he couldn't bear to see Emily in that state. For him, each visit only reinforced the idea that his sister would never come back. "Mom, are you sure?" "Yes. It wasn't just a reflex," Grace replied with conviction. "I saw it. You can see for yourself. Stay here and watch her." Ethan approached and stood next to the bed, looking at Emily's expressionless face. He felt a lump in his throat when he saw his sister, who had once been so full of life, now trapped in silence. "You were always stubborn, you know," Ethan said with a melancholy smile as he spoke to Emily. "You never let anyone beat you, not even me. If you're still here, Emily, show us." For a moment, as Ethan held his sister's hand, he felt a slight twitch. It wasn't strong or constant, but it was real enough to make him freeze. "Mom, I think I felt something." Grace quickly approached, holding Emily's hand along with her son, as if they both wanted to transmit their energy to her. "You saw it! I told you she's here!" exclaimed Grace, tears running down her face. Ethan remained silent. Looking at his sister for the first time in weeks, he felt a spark of hope wash over him. It was as if that small, almost insignificant movement had pulled an invisible thread that connected his sister to the world again. The morning at the hospital began like any other, with the sounds of the machines monitoring Emily and the routine of the nurses. But for Grace, the day was different. The movement that she and Ethan had witnessed the night before had rekindled her determination. Her daughter was there fighting, and she needed the doctors to believe it too. When Dr. Morales entered the room for his daily evaluation, Grace stood between him and Emily's bed. Her eyes were red from exhaustion, but there was an unbreakable strength in her posture. "Doctor, I need you to listen to me." Yesterday her hand moved. It wasn't a reflex. It was something involuntary. It was her. Morales took a deep breath, his tone calm but distant. "Mrs. Grace, I understand your hope, but it's important not to confuse bodily reactions with signs of consciousness. Movements like that can occur even without significant brain activity." "Without significant brain activity," Grace repeated, her voice trembling. "Grace, you don't understand. I know my daughter better than any machine, better than any test. You can't tell me it was just a reflex." Morales crossed his arms, trying to maintain his professional composure. "We are doing everything we can, within the limits of science, Mrs. Grace." "Science?" exclaimed Grace, tears running down her face and heart. "Doctor, have you ever lost someone you love? Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone who is struggling?" And have you known with every fiber of your being that person is still there? Grace's words hit Morales like a punch. For a brief moment he looked away, as if something inside him had been exposed. Yes, he had lost someone. He had held his own daughter's hand, waiting for a sign that never came. "Mrs. Grace," he began, but was interrupted. "No, doctor. I don't want to keep hearing that it's impossible, because if I give up on my daughter, who else will believe in her? Who else will fight for her?" Morales was silent, Grace's words echoing in his mind. He saw her face, worn out by pain, but lit up by a faith he could understand, but was beginning to admire. Finally, he took a step toward Emily's bed and examined her hand more closely than before. "I'll order more tests," he said quietly, almost hesitantly. "Maybe we can reevaluate." Grace nodded, wiping away her tears, but her voice was still full of determination. "Thank you, doctor. But know that it's not the tests that give me hope. It's her." Morales left the room slowly, as if each step pulled him back to his own painful memories. Outside, he stopped, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, he felt something he had kept buried deep inside, the possibility of believing again. Meanwhile, Grace returned to Emily's side, holding her hand once more. "They may doubt, my love, but I know you're here." Ethan was sitting on a bench in a park near the hospital, staring at the ground with his hands in his pockets. The night before, he couldn't get it out of his head. The slight tremor in Emily's hand, the sparkle in her mother's eyes. He still wasn't sure if he believed all that, but something inside him pushed him back to his sister's room. As he entered the hospital, Ethan hesitated for a moment at the door, his way of escaping the fear and pain that consumed him every time he saw Emily motionless. But this time, something was different. He couldn't leave his sister alone in the room. Grace was by Emily's bedside, as always. When she saw Ethan enter, she smiled, surprised and excited. "You came, son?" "I want to try again, Mom," he replied, with a small sideways smile. Ethan dragged a chair over and sat down next to Emily. He remained silent for a few seconds, observing his sister's serene face. Despite everything, she still looked the same. He closed his eyes for a moment, and then began to speak. "Hey, Emily, it's Ethan again. You know, the coolest and most handsome brother." He laughed, although his voice trembled a little. "I'm here because Mom thinks you can hear us. And you know what? I think she's right." He began to tell stories from when they were children, the adventures they shared in the backyard, the silly fights that always ended in laughter. "Do you remember that time you tried to teach the neighbor's dog to swim in the pool? He ran away and got the whole house wet. And you were the one who got scolded. I've never laughed so hard in my life." As he spoke, Ethan realized that his own pain was beginning to transform for the first time in weeks. He felt a real connection with Emily, as if she were still there, listening to every word. "You were always the stronger one of the two of us, you know. You always said I should have courage, that I should fight for my dreams. So now I'm here asking you to do the same." Grace watched silently, her eyes filled with tears, seeing her son open up in a way she hadn't seen in a long time. Day after day, Ethan returned to the hospital. He brought photos, books that Emily loved, even songs they used to listen to together. He read, sang, and told stories. "Emily, if you can hear me, give me a sign. I need you." "Okay," she said during one of his visits, holding her sister's hand tightly one night, while Ethan talked about how his father taught Emily to swim. Something surprising happened. An almost imperceptible sound came from Emily's throat, as if she were trying to respond. Ethan froze, looking at Grace with wide eyes. "Mom, did you hear that?" Grace nodded, taking Emily's hand more tightly. "It was her. Ethan, it was her. She's fighting." It was a cold and cloudy morning when Grace, returning home quickly to get some clean clothes, found something she didn't expect on the kitchen table. From the kitchen, there was a folded letter with the name Mom written in Ethan's handwriting. Her heart sank instantly, her hands trembling. Grace opened the letter and began to read. "Mom, if you're reading this, you've probably realized that I didn't go to school today. In fact, I don't think I'm going anymore. There's no point in continuing. I know that right now, the only thing that matters is Emily, and that's okay because she needs you. But I'm not like her. I don't have the big dreams she has. I'm not important. Maybe if I step aside, you can focus better on her. Don't worry, I'll be fine." The words were like knives cutting into Grace's heart. She felt tears welling up as she read and reread the letter, each sentence laden with pain and sacrifice. "Ethan, my son," she whispered, holding the letter to her chest as if trying to ease the weight she felt. Suddenly, images of forgotten moments began. She remembered Ethan trying to talk to her about a school project while she was distracted by the news about Emily. She remembered the times he would walk into the room and leave without saying anything, when he realized that all her attention was on his sister. How could I not have noticed? Grace thought, now consumed by guilt and determined to fix what was wrong. Grace returned to the hospital, where she found Ethan sitting next to Emily, reading aloud one of his favorite books aloud. He seemed calm, but Grace knew there was a storm inside him. Ethan called out to him, his voice breaking. He looked up, surprised to see his mother holding the letter. "Mom, don't say anything, please," he interrupted. Grace sat down next to him, took her son's hand firmly, and looked him in the eyes. "I found your letter, my love." Ethan looked away, ashamed. "I just wanted you to be able to focus on it. You don't have to worry about me." Grace felt tears welling up, but her voice was full of determination. "Ethan, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was so focused on saving your sister that I forgot that you need me too. You are just as important as she is, my son. I was wrong to let you feel that way." Ethan tried to smile, but his eyes were filled with tears. "No, Mom. I'm not like Emily. I'm not special." Grace hugged him tightly, the words coming out between sobs. "You're special, Ethan. You always have been. You brought light into my life. When I thought I couldn't go on after your dad left. You're the reason I have the strength to fight now." Ethan finally cried, allowing himself to show the vulnerability he had hidden for so long. Grace cupped his face in her hands, as she did when he was little. "Never think you're not important. You are my strength as much as Emily is, and I promise I'll be a better mom to you too." The tension between Grace and Dr. Morales seemed to grow with each encounter. She saw him as someone incapable of understanding the depth of her pain and hope. He, on the other hand, avoided lengthy conversations, sticking to scientific explanations as if trying to protect himself from something deeper. That afternoon, after another discussion about Emily's tests, Grace followed Morales down the hall, determined to confront him. Is it Dr. Morales?" Grace called out, her voice breaking, but full of determination. Morales stopped, turning slowly, his face showing the weariness of someone who had heard similar pleas many times before. "Mrs. Grace, I already explained. We can't create unrealistic expectations. We have to work with facts." Grace approached him, her eyes shining with tears, but her posture firm. "It's not about facts, doctor. It's about believing. I see how you avoid looking at my daughter. How talk about her as if she were just a medical case. Why are you so afraid to believe she can come back for a moment?" Morales seemed paralyzed, as if Grace's words had struck him deeply. He looked away, but couldn't walk away. "I'm not afraid," he replied in a tone that seemed more like an attempt to convince himself than a statement. "Yes, you are," Grace insisted, taking a step toward him. "I don't know what happened to you, but I know you understand this pain. I see in your eyes." Morales took a deep breath, as if fighting an invisible battle. Finally, he spoke in a voice lower and more vulnerable than ever. "My daughter Lily was 7 years old. A car accident. She was in a coma for months. I did everything. I tried everything, but she didn't come back." The words fell like a stone, filling the hallway with a heavy silence. Grace remained motionless for a few seconds, processing what he had just confessed. "And since then, she stopped believing," she said with delicacy. Morales laughed bitterly, running a hand over his face. "I saw how hope destroys people. I saw how my own heart broke when I lost my daughter. I promised myself I would never let my emotions interfere again." Grace took a step toward him, her eyes full of compassion. "Doctor, I am so sorry for your loss. I cannot imagine the pain you have carried, but stopping believing did not protect you, did it?" That wall you built didn't bring your daughter back. It only distanced you from people. Morales looked up, and for the first time, he seemed truly vulnerable. What if she doesn't come back, Mrs. Grace? What if all this is in vain? Grace gently touched his arm. I don't know what will happen, but I know that the love I have for my daughter gives me the strength to carry on. Maybe believing again isn't about avoiding pain, Doctor, but about finding the strength to face it. Silence returned to reign, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. Morales nodded slightly, as if processing Grace's words. I'll review Emily's tests more carefully, but as I said before, there isn't much research on this. It all depends on her now, he said in a tone that contained more than a professional promise as he walked away. Grace watched him with a mixture of compassion and hope. She knew that at that moment it wasn't just her daughter who needed a miracle, but also the man who was finally beginning to lower the barriers around his heart. The afternoon in the hospital brought a soft light that entered Emily's room, reflecting off the small container of water that Grace kept next to the bed. It was a visit like so many others, but for Grace, every moment with her daughter was an opportunity to try something new. Ethan was also there, sitting quietly, watching his mother talk to Emily as if she might respond at any moment. He had begun to understand the power of that hope. Although he still doubted where it would lead them, Ethan called Grace. Suddenly turning to her son with a gleam in her eyes, she asked, "Why don't you play something?" "Play?" Ethan asked, confused. "Yes, the song your dad always played for us. Remember how he loved to sing? Even though he was out of tune." Ethan hesitated, looking at his motionless sister. The idea seemed absurd, but something in his mother's determination of his mother made him pick up the guitar that was in the corner. "Okay, Mom, but don't expect too much." He quickly tuned the strings and began to play a familiar melody, soft and full of emotion. The music filled the room, bringing back memories of happier days when they were a complete family. Ethan closed his eyes as he played, his voice trembling as he sang the first verses. Grace, next to Emily, held his hand gently. "Do you remember this, my girl?" he whispered. "Your dad used to say this song was like a hug that healed everything." When Ethan reached the chorus, something happened. A single tear began to roll down Emily's face, glistening in the evening light. Grace held her breath. "Ethan, wait! Look!" she exclaimed, her voice full of emotion. He stopped playing, confused, until he saw what his mother was pointing at. His eyes widened as he saw the tear sliding down her face. "Mom cried." Grace leaned over, wiping the tear with her finger, unable to hold back her own tears, which were now falling freely. I knew it was here," she sobbed. Grace held Emily's face gently. The doctors were called immediately, including Dr. Morales, who arrived quickly with an expression of skepticism and curiosity. "A tear?" he asked as he examined Emily carefully. "Yes, doctor. The music was when Ethan played song for her dad. It was as if she responded." Morales observed her serious expression for a few moments, but something in his eyes betrayed his professional facade. He turned to Grace and Ethan. "I will order new tests to see if there has been any change in brain activity." When he left, Grace hugged Ethan tightly. "You see, son, it was a miracle. I know it was." Ethan held the guitar tightly. Looking at his sister for the first time, he began to believe that the music that had always been a symbol of love in their family had reached Emily in her silence. The day after the miracle of the tear brought a different atmosphere to Emily's room. Grace was restless, moving from one side to the other while Ethan was still processing what had happened the night before. The sound of the music, the exact moment of the tear, everything seemed like a sign that Emily was trying to come back. When Dr. Morales entered the room, Grace got straight to the point. "Doctor, and the new tests yesterday," she reacted. "That was a sign, I'm sure." Morales hesitated for a moment, the cautious expression he always wore beginning to fade. "Mrs. Grace, we'll do them today, but as I already explained, don't get your hopes up. The tears may just be reflex responses." "No, doctor, that wasn't a reflex," Grace interrupted, her voice full of emotion. Was it the music that awakened something in her? Morales looked at Ethan, who nodded silently. The young man seemed more hopeful than ever. Morales sighed, finally giving in. "Very well. We're just waiting for the doctor in charge of the equipment, and we'll do it as quickly as possible. The medical team mobilized, and Grace accompanied them, her heart in her hand. They took Emily to the tomography room, while Grace and Ethan waited outside. The silence between them was charged with expectation. When Morales came out of the room with the results, his face looked different. There was something in his eyes that Grace couldn't decipher. Surprise? Uncertainty? "What's going on, doctor?" Grace asked, her voice trembling with anxiety. Morales held the images of the studies in his hands and placed them on a nearby table, pointing to a specific area. "There is slight but significant activity in the motor cortex and frontal lobe." Grace frowned, trying to understand. "And what does that mean?" Morales took a deep breath before continuing. "It means that although minimal, there is a chance that Emily is trying to connect with the outside world. It's not much, but it's a sign that her brain is still active on some level." Grace brought her hands to her face, tears streaming freely. Ethan put a hand on his mother's shoulder, equally emotional. "So she's fighting, doctor?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. "Yes," Morales admitted with a small smile that seemed to have been stored away for a long time. "She's fighting, Grace." Those words were all she needed to hear. She knew it. She knew she was here, Grace murmured, looking up at the ceiling as if thanking God. Back in the room, Grace sat down next to Emily, holding her hand tighter than before. "You hear that, my girl? You're winning. We're all with you." Ethan picked up his guitar again, playing the same song that had made his sister cry while he played. Grace whispered in Emily's ear, "No matter how long it takes, we're going to bring you back, one step at a time." The room was quiet that afternoon, lit by the golden light coming through the window. Grace had gone out for a few minutes to talk to the doctors, leaving Ethan alone with Emily. He was sitting next to the bed, with the guitar resting on his lap, as if waiting for inspiration that didn't come. Ethan looked at his sister, still so motionless, but now with a small spark of hope lighting up everything around her. He sighed and began to speak as he had done so many times in recent weeks. "Hello, Emily." His voice was low, but full of affection. "Did you know that Dad used to say you were just like him? Strong, stubborn, even a little bossy at times." He laughed softly, but the emotion was evident on his face. "He always made me jealous, you know. He said I was the calm one, the dreamer, but you were the force. He said you would go far, that you had something special." Ethan looked up at the ceiling, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. "Dad would be so proud of you, Emily. I'm sure he would. He always believed in miracles, and now I understand what he meant." Then something unexpected happened. Out of the corner of his eye, Ethan noticed a small movement. He frowned, unsure if he had imagined it. When he looked again, he saw it clearly. Emily's finger. It moved almost imperceptibly, but it was Ro. Ethan called out, his voice trembling. Grace leaned closer, holding her hand gently. "You're trying to talk to me. Please do it again." And then, slowly, Emily's finger moved again, as if responding to her brother's call. Ethan felt tears running down his face, unable to hold them back. Mom screamed in despair as she held Emily's hand, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Mom, come here." Grace rushed into the room, alarmed, and found Ethan crying by the bed. "What happened, Ethan? What was it? Her finger?" Mom moved her finger and pointed, her voice still broken. Grace ran to the bed, took Emily's hand, and stared. "My girl, please do it again. Show us you're here." For a few seconds, the room was silent, and then, as if Emily were responding to her mother's plea, her finger moved again. Grace fell to her knees, crying, "I knew it. I knew you were here, my daughter." The sound of Grace and Ethan's tears and excited laughter filled the room, while outside a nurse peered in at the scene, bringing the news to the doctors. "Dr. Morales, something happened. She's trying to communicate." Ethan, his face still wet with tears, knelt beside his sister. "We're going to bring you back. Emily, no matter how long it takes." Dad was right. Miracles do exist. The hospital room, once a place of almost unbearable silence, now had a new energy after Emily's first finger movement. Grace did not rest until she convinced the doctors to bring in a neurology and rehabilitation specialist. She knew that those small gestures were more than reflexes. They were proof that her daughter was trying to communicate. That afternoon, Dr. Herrera, a neurologist known for working with extreme cases, arrived at the hospital. He had a calm demeanor and a patient manner that immediately conveyed confidence to Grace and Ethan. "Mrs. Grace, I heard about Emily's progress. Small movements can be more significant than they appear. Let's see what we can do." Herrera gently began to examine Emily, asking Grace to explain exactly what had happened. That's when Ethan mentioned his dad. "Her finger moved twice," Grace said, her voice still filled with emotion. Herrera nodded, taking Emily's hand carefully. "Sometimes when someone is trapped in a state like Emily's, the body finds ways to express itself, even if they are minimal. We are going to work together to decipher those signals." In the following days, Herrera brought in specialized equipment and guided Grace and Ethan to ask simple questions while observing any response in Emily's movements. "Emily, if you can hear me, move your finger once to say yes," Grace whispered, holding her daughter's hand carefully. At first, the movements were almost imperceptible, like a light breeze that you can barely feel. But over time, Grace and Ethan began to notice a pattern. One afternoon, while Ethan was reading an excerpt from Emily's diary, he decided to try again. "Emily, do you remember writing this? Move your finger if you remember." To his surprise, Emily's finger moved slowly, like a hesitant but clear answer. Ethan almost dropped the diary. "Mom answered," Grace said. She ran toward them excitedly. Every little movement seemed like a miracle, a window into Emily's inner world. Watching from a distance, he approached and asked a delicate question. "Emily, do you want to keep trying to communicate? Move your finger to say yes." Emily's finger moved again, a firmer gesture this time. Grace fell to her knees beside the bed, holding her daughter's hand and crying with relief. "We're going to understand you, my girl. I promise we'll figure out everything you want to say." Progress was slow, but each new movement brought renewed hope. Herrera taught Grace to pay attention to the smallest details. A blink, the tension of a muscle, anything that could be a sign. "It's a process of patience and love, Mrs. Grace. She's trying, and you're doing everything right," Herrera said with an encouraging smile. As the days passed, Grace began to decipher Emily's responses, as if they were a new language made up of subtle, meaningful gestures. The silence remained, but now it seemed full of promise and possibility, as if the world around Emily were waiting for her next move. Dr. Morales had always been a solid, objective presence at the hospital, someone who kept his emotions out of his work, as if each case were just a problem to be solved. But something about Emily's case was different. He saw Grace's tireless dedication, Ethan's genuine hope, and the small signs of progress the girl was making, and all of that began to touch a part of himself that he thought he had closed off forever. One particularly quiet night, while reviewing recent reports in his office, Morales paused when he saw the image on Emily's monitor showing slight brain activity. His thoughts took him back to a painful past that he always avoided facing. He closed his eyes, and for a moment the memory flooded back like a wave. Lily, his daughter, smiling as she played in the yard. The accident that took her life was quick and cruel, but the silence that followed was what hurt the most. He remembered the endless weeks in the hospital, holding her hand, waiting for a sign that never came. When Lily left, Morales promised never to let hope guide him again, believing it would be safer to harden his heart. But now, with Emily, he began to wonder, what if he was wrong? The next day, Morales decided to get closer to the family. He entered Emily's room and saw Grace and Ethan by the bed, practicing the exercises that Dr. Herrera had taught them. "Dr. Morales?" said Grace, surprised to see him. "Any news?" He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Actually, I wanted to see how you are." Grace and Ethan looked at each other in surprise. Until that moment, Morales had always seemed distant, focused only on the technical aspects. "We're fine, doctor. More hopeful. Every day," Grace replied in a soft voice, but one laden with emotion. Morales observed their interaction with Emily, the care in every gesture, the patience in every word. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the pain she carried. "Mrs. Grace, can I speak with you privately?" She nodded, and the two went out into the hallway. Morales seemed nervous, struggling with what he was about to say. "About our conversation the other day, there's something you need to know," he began in a low voice. "I lost my daughter Lily in a car accident." Grace remained silent, her eyes filled with compassion. "I did everything I could. I held her hand for weeks, waiting for a sign, but it never came. When she left, I promised myself I would never let emotion overwhelm me again. I thought it would be easier, that it would be better for the patients if I didn't get involved." Grace put a hand on his arm, offering silent comfort. "Doctor, I'm so sorry for your loss. No one should have to bear such pain." He shook his head, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. "But seeing how you fight for Emily, made me realize something. Maybe I gave up believing too soon." "It's never too late to believe again, Doctor," Grace said with a small smile. "Hope can hurt, I know, but it can also heal." Morales looked at Grace, impressed by the strength she showed. "I want to help more, not just as a doctor, but as someone who understands what you're going through." Grace nodded, moved by the vulnerability of the man who until then had seemed unbreakable. "Thank you, Doctor. You don't know how much this means to us." Back in the room, Morales approached Emily's bed with a different look. For the first time, he didn't just see a patient. He saw a young woman fighting to come back, and a family clinging to hope as if it were all they had. "Don't give up, Emily. Show us all, that miracles can still happen." It was a normal day at the hospital, but Emily's room seemed livelier than ever. Grace was practicing communication exercises with Ethan, while Dr. Morales watched with interest, almost as if he were already part of the family. "Emily, my girl, if you're happy that Ethan is here, move your finger," Grace asked with a smile, and as on previous occasions, a small movement answered the question. Ethan laughed as he approached his sister. "See, you can't live without me," he joked, trying to hide the emotion that filled his voice. But the joy was suddenly interrupted. The heart monitor began to beep. A sharp beep filled the room like a danger alarm. Emily began to breathe with difficulty. Her body seemed to be locked in an unexpected reaction. "What's going on, doctor?" Grace shouted, panic taking hold of her voice. Morales quickly called the medical team, and the room filled with nurses rushing to stabilize Emily. Grace and Ethan were forced to leave, standing outside helplessly as they watched the doctor's work. "No, please. She wasn't getting better," whispered Grace, clutching her chest as if trying to protect her heart from another loss. Minutes passed that felt like hours until Morales came out of the room with a tense but controlled expression. "She had a respiratory complication. We had to intubate her," he said, knowing the weight of his words. "This may delay the signs we saw, but the important thing now is to make sure she is stable." Grace felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. She sat down on the bench in the hallway, covering her face with her hands, as if all the hope she had built up was crumbling. Ethan sat down next to her, trying to find words to comfort her. "Mom, listen. She's strong. You saw it. I saw it. One step back doesn't mean she's given up. And if it's more than one step back?" Grace asked, raising her tear-filled eyes to her son. "What if she doesn't come back?" Ethan took his mother's hands firmly. "Don't talk like that. Emily hasn't given up, and neither will we." Grace looked at her son, seeing in him a reflection of her husband and the strength that she herself was beginning to lose. Her words, though simple, they touched something inside her. "You're right, Ethan. We can't give up on her." When they were finally able to return to the room, Grace sat down next to Emily again. Despite the sedation, she took her daughter's hand and whispered, "My girl, we're here, and we'll stay here no matter what happens. I promise you that." The days after Emily's sedation were difficult for Grace and Ethan. The progress they had dreamed of seemed to have stopped, and the silence in the room was heavier than ever. Grace spent hours holding her daughter's hand, repeating the same words of love and encouragement. "My girl, we are here. No matter how long it takes, we are going to bring you back." Ethan, who until then had tried to be strong, began to doubt. But every time he saw his mother with her seemingly inexhaustible strength, he picked himself up again. One night, Grace was alone with Emily. The room was dark, lit only by the dim light of the monitor. Suddenly, she noticed something. Emily's lips were trembling slightly. Emily called Grace, leaning closer. "My girl, what are you trying to do?" Emily's lips moved again, almost imperceptibly. Grace held her breath, her heart racing. My God, she's trying to say something. The next day, Grace insisted that Morales call a lip-reading specialist. Her lips are moving, doctor. It's a sign. Please, we need to try. Morales, now closer to the family. He nodded. I will. The specialist arrived that afternoon, observing Emily attentively while Grace and Ethan spoke to her. Emily, you can do it again. Move your lips. Try to tell us something. The camera focused on Emily's lips, which once again moved, albeit subtly. The specialist began to interpret. After several attempts, he looked up excitedly. It seems she is forming a word. Mom? Grace began to cry, tears streaming down her face. Mommy, my little girl, you called me. I'm here. I'm here. Ethan approached, excited, placing a hand on his mother's shoulder. I knew it, Mom. I knew she would come back. Emily tried to move her lips again, while Grace gently held her face. It's okay, sweetheart. You're doing great. Keep trying. The word mommy seemed to be the first step on a long road. Morales, watching from afar, clenched his fists close to his body, trying to contain the emotion that overwhelmed him. This is a miracle, he murmured to himself. With the confirmation that Emily was trying to communicate, the medical team began working on an intensive rehabilitation plan. Specialists in occupational therapy, speech therapy, and neurology were called in to develop specific exercises to help Emily strengthen her movements and expand her communication skills. Grace attended every meeting, taking notes and promising committing to follow every recommendation. I'll do whatever it takes to help her, she said firmly. Ethan also offered to help. He began bringing music, familiar objects, and newspaper clippings that might stimulate Emily's memory. Maybe this will help Mom. She loved these things. The days were exhausting, but every small advance brought a new wave of hope. The movement of a finger, the twitch of a muscle, or a new attempt to form words. Emily was still far from a full recovery, but now more than ever, Grace, Ethan, and even Morales believed it was possible. The room was quiet that morning, with only the soft sound of the machines monitoring Emily's vital signs. Grace was by her daughter's side, as always, holding her hand and speaking softly, as if each word were a thread connecting Emily's life to the outside world. Ethan was on the other side of the bed, with a small notebook and a pen in his hands. Mom, I think we can try this today, he said, handing the notebook to Grace. Maybe she can write something. Grace looked at the notebook with a mixture of hope and caution. She knew that any progress Emily made would be slow and require patience, but she decided to try. My girl, do you want to try to write? She asked, holding Emily's hand gently. It doesn't have to be much, just what you can do. With Grace's help to hold the pen, Emily began to move her still weak and hesitant fingers. The movement was almost imperceptible, but Grace and Ethan watched intently, as if each stroke on the paper carried a world of unspoken emotions. After several minutes, a word apparently took shape on the page. No, Grace frowned in confusion. No, what do you mean, my girl? With effort, Emily continued writing. Her entire body seemed to struggle against immobility. Ethan held the notebook with firmly, while Grace gently guided her daughter's hand. Little by little, other words appeared. I don't want to compete. Grace read the words aloud, her voice trembling as she tried to process what she was seeing. You don't want to compete? She asked. Looking at her daughter, Emily struggled to nod her head slightly in a gesture that seemed to say yes. Grace felt a knot in her heart, and tears began to run down her face. My girl, she whispered. Ethan looked at his mother, feeling the emotion in the room, but also a question hanging in the air. Mom, maybe she wants to say something else. Grace nodded, wiping away her tears and encouraging Emily to continue with small strokes. After about 15 minutes, during which it was difficult to interpret the letters, a new phrase emerged. I love swimming, but I felt pressure. Grace brought her hand to her mouth in surprise. Finally, the feelings that Emily had never expressed were coming to light. You loved swimming, but you felt pressure, Grace repeated, her voice breaking. She began to remember all the times she had pushed Emily to do her best, believing she was doing the right thing, but not realizing the weight she was placing on her daughter's shoulders. "I'm so sorry, my girl." Grace leaned over the bed, holding Emily's face gently. "It was never my intention to make you feel that way." Ethan put his hand on his mother's shoulder. His voice, "She needed to say that. And now that she has, we can help her find what truly makes her happy." Grace nodded, wiping her eyes. "My girl, you don't have to compete anymore. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You are perfect just the way you are." Emily nodded slightly again, and a tear ran down her face as if confirming the relief that her truth had finally been heard. After reading Emily's words in the notebook, Grace couldn't shake the guilt that consumed her. Every sentence written by her daughter seemed like a window into what she had ignored for so long. For years, she had believed she was helping Emily achieve her dreams. But deep down, it was Grace's dreams that guided every incentive, every demand, every expectation. That night, Grace sat down next to Emily's bed and gently held her hand. Ethan had gone out to get something to eat, leaving the two of them alone. "My girl, I made so many mistakes with you." Grace's voice was low but full of emotion. "I thought I was doing what was best, but I never asked what you really wanted." The memories began to surface. The endless training sessions, the competitions Grace insisted Emily participate in, and the moments when her daughter seemed to hesitate but never said no. "I just wanted you to be happy, to shine, but now I see that I pushed you too hard. I just wanted to honor your dad, you know? He always said you had a special strength, that you could conquer the world." Grace brought her hand to her face, trying to hold back the tears that were now flowing uncontrollably. "But I should have asked what made you happy, my girl, not what I thought was best." For a moment, Emily moved her fingers slightly in Grace's hand, as if trying to comfort her. Grace smiled through her tears. "Thank you for forgiving me." She kissed Emily's forehead gently. "That from now on, I will always listen to you." While Grace was dealing with her own regrets, Ethan was undergoing his own transformation. In recent months, he had devoted himself entirely to helping his sister, but deep down, there was an internal struggle that he did not share. The letter he wrote to his mother admitting that he felt unimportant continued to echo in his mind. That morning, as he returned to the hospital with a coffee in his hands, he found himself looking at an old photo in the hallway. He and Emily were still children, playing in the pool. She never gave up on anything, he thought. Even now, she is fighting, inspired by her sister's strength. Ethan decided it was time to get his life back on track. When he entered Emily's room, he found Grace holding her hand, her eyes still swollen from crying. "Mom, can I talk to you?" Grace looked up, surprised by the seriousness in her son's voice. "Sure, son. What's up?" "I've decided to go back to school." Grace blinked, confused. "Go back?" Ethan nodded, taking a deep breath. "I realized that while you were fighting for Emily, I was drifting away. I thought I wasn't important, that my life had no meaning. But seeing her strength, seeing her fight for every little movement, I realized I can't give up. Not for her, not for us." Grace stood up and hugged him tightly. "Son, I'm so proud of you." Ethan smiled. Looking at his sister Emily, "I promise I'll be a better brother, and when you come back, I'll help you with whatever you want to do. No competitions, just what you really love." Emily moved her fingers slightly, and Ethan laughed excitedly. "I knew you'd agree." It was a quiet afternoon at the hospital. Emily's room was silent, filled only with the sound of the machines. Grace was at the bedside, adjusting Emily's sheets, while Ethan read aloud from a book she used to love. Dr. Morales appeared at the door, watching for a few moments before entering. "Can I talk to you, Mrs. Grace?" he asked, his voice a little uncertain. Grace looked at him, noticing something different in his tone, and followed the doctor into the hallway outside. Sunlight streamed through the windows, creating soft shadows on the floor. "Doctor, did something happen?" Grace asked worriedly. Morales shook his head. "No, I just wanted to say something." He paused, searching for the right words. For months he had watched that family struggle with a strength that impressed him, that made him rethink everything he believed. "Mrs. Grace, when I started caring for Emily, I must confess that I didn't believe she could progress. My experience told me that cases like hers rarely show results." Grace kept her gaze fixed on him, waiting for the rest. "But you, Ethan, and Emily herself, showed me something that I had forgotten. The strength of your love, your determination not to give up, made me understand something I had avoided for a long time. What is that, Doctor? Grace asked softly. He took a deep breath. Miracles are not just a matter of faith. They are the result of struggle, hope, and the support of those who love us. And thanks to your family, I believe again. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Doctor. That means a lot to us. Morales smiled, a rare but sincere gesture. Not at all, Mrs. Grace. You are the ones who deserve the thanks, and I promise to continue fighting for her alongside you. The moment was brief but profound, as if a bridge had been built between the doctor and the family, uniting them by something greater than medicine. That night, as Ethan gently played the guitar by the bedside, Grace decided to try something different, inspired by Morales's words. She leaned toward Emily and took her hand. My girl, you have been so strong. Now I want you to try something new. I want you to try to move your arm, even if it's just a little bit. Ethan stopped playing and watched intently as Grace continued to encourage Emily. It doesn't matter if it's difficult. We're here with you, Emily. With visible effort, Emily tried to move her arm. Her muscles trembled as if every fiber of her body was fighting against an invisible barrier. Ethan held his breath, and Grace gently squeezed her daughter's hand. But at the last moment, the movement failed. Emily's arm fell back onto the bed, without the strength to continue. Grace saw tears welling up in her daughter's eyes, a reflection of the effort and frustration she felt inside. It's okay, sweetheart, Grace said in a voice full of affection. She took Emily's face in her hands, wiping away her tears with her fingers. Every bit of progress counts. Remember, you tried, and that's incredible. Ethan put a hand on his sister's shoulder. His sister, smiling with eyes shining with excitement. You were so close, Emily. We'll try again tomorrow, and then the day after tomorrow, and then again. Emily's gaze seemed to convey gratitude and determination, even without words. The clock was striking midnight, and the hospital was enveloped in a deep silence. However, Emily's room was far from a place of rest. Grace was at the bedside, as always, holding her daughter's hand. Ethan sat in a corner. He adjusted the strings of his guitar, seeking the courage to bring some joy to that moment. Mom, do you think she still remembers Dad's song? Ethan asked, looking at Grace. Grace smiled softly despite the obvious tiredness in her eyes. Of course she remembers that song, son. It was always our refuge no matter what was going on. Ethan took a deep breath and began to play the first chords, filling the room with a feeling of warmth and nostalgia. She closed her eyes, singing in a soft voice full of emotion, as if each word carried a piece of her soul. When the world seems dark, remember that there is always light in my love. Grace squeezed Emily's hand tighter, leaning toward her. My girl, listen to your brother. This song was always special to you. Suddenly, something happened. Grace felt a slight movement in Emily's hand and looked at her, her heart racing. Ethan, stop! Look at her. Ethan stopped the music, frightened. He saw that Emily's face was moving slightly, as if she were trying to sit up. Then, with almost imperceptible strength, she lifted her head a little, a gesture that had seemed impossible just a short time ago. My God, Emily! Ethan exclaimed, tears already streaming down his face. Grace covered her mouth with her hands, unable to hold back her tears. My girl, you did it. I knew you could do it. Emily's head slowly returned to the pillow, but the gesture was a clear sign that something inside her was changing. Ethan took her hand tenderly. You're coming back, Emily. You're fighting, and we're always here. The next morning, the room was filled with anticipation. Dr. Morales and the medical team joined the family to watch for signs of progress. Ethan still held the guitar, ready to repeat the song, while Grace kept her eyes fixed on Emily. Emily, if you can hear us, try to say something. Anything, Grace asked, her voice full of hope. The silence was broken by a faint, almost inaudible sound. Then, with visible effort, Emily moved her lips and whispered, I love you. For a moment, no one could believe what they had heard. It was as if time had stopped. Then Grace fell to her knees beside the bed, holding her daughter's face as tears flowed freely. I love you too, my girl. We all love you so much. Ethan stood motionless, her hands trembling as he held his guitar. He approached his sister, laughing and crying at the same time. "You spoke, Emily. You spoke." Even Dr. Morales, who always tried to maintain his composure, seemed moved. He placed a hand on Grace's shoulder and with a discreet smile said, "This, Mrs. Grace, is the power of love." The days that followed Emily's first "I love you" were filled with hope and hard work. Every movement, every whispered word seemed like a new miracle. With the help of the medical team and the tireless dedication of Grace and Ethan, Emily began to regain basic movements. At first, she could only move her fingers, then her arms, and eventually she was able to move her legs slightly. Grace held her hand during each physical therapy session, encouraging her with sweet words. "My girl, you're doing so well. I'm so proud of you." Ethan, for his part, always brought a touch of humor and lightheartedness. "Come on, Emily. Soon you'll be running after me like when we were kids." Those moments of togetherness strengthened the family like never before. Grace, who had previously carried the guilt of neglecting Ethan, now valued every contribution her son made. Ethan, inspired by his sister's struggle, showed a maturity and sense of responsibility that impressed everyone. "Mom, Dad would be proud of us," he said one day as he watched Emily complete a difficult exercise. "Yes, they would be," Grace replied, with tears in her eyes. At the heart of every challenge, the family found strength in each other. Their connection was not only a support for Emily, but also a reminder that together they could overcome anything. One afternoon, while Ethan was out buying some snacks, Grace decided to have an important conversation with Emily. She sat down next to the bed, took her daughter's hand, and looked her straight in the eyes. "My girl, there's something I need to tell you." Emily tilted her head slightly, as if she had been waiting for her mother's words all these years. "I put so much pressure on you. I made you believe that you had to carry your dad's dreams and mine. I never asked you what you really wanted." Grace's eyes began to fill with tears. "I just wanted you to shine, to be strong, but now I see that without realizing it, I hurt you. I'm so sorry, my girl." Emily moved her lips with effort and whispered softly, "I understand, Mom." Grace broke down in tears, but this time there was relief in her pain. "Thank you, my girl. Thank you for forgiving me. I promise that from now on I will listen to you." Emily's simple but meaningful response seemed to heal years of burden that Grace had carried in her heart. With continued progress, Emily began to speak more, albeit slowly and hesitantly. During a conversation with Grace and Ethan, she expressed something that surprised them both. "I want to help others." Grace looked at her daughter in confusion. "Help others? How, my child?" Emily took a deep breath before continuing. "People like me." Ethan smiled excitedly. "You want to help people who are facing the same thing you did?" Emily nodded slightly. "I don't want them to feel alone." Grace took her daughter's hand, her eyes shining with pride. "My child has always been strong, and now you are becoming the inspiration that many people need." Emily's new dream gave the family a renewed purpose. Ethan began researching organizations and projects that help people in recovery, while Grace shared Emily's story with other mothers at the hospital. Together, they not only rebuilt their own family, but also began to build a new mission, to bring hope to those who needed it most. Emily's story had already touched the hearts of those closest to the family, but it began to spread throughout the small town where Grace and Ethan lived. Even Dr. Morales spoke of Emily's strength and the tireless fight to bring her back. Soon, neighbors, friends, and even people who did not know the family began to mobilize. One afternoon, while Grace was at the hospital with Ethan, they heard a soft knock on the door of the room. When Grace opened it, she found Mariana, the neighbor who used to play with Emily when they were girls. She was carrying a large box in her hands and had a shy smile on her face. "Doña Grace, I'm sorry to bother you, but..." Mariana hesitated before continuing. "My friends and I have organized something to help." Grace frowned in confusion, but let Mariana in. When she opened the box, she found several donations: food, clothes, toys, and even an envelope full of folded bills. "What is this, dear?" Grace asked with tears in her eyes. "It's just a little of what we collected, Doña Grace. We know that hospital expenses are high, and we wanted to help." Grace burst into tears, taking Mariana's hands. "You didn't have to do this, but thank you so much." In the days that followed, more people began to show up. Some neighbors offered services, while others brought more donations. A close friend of Grace's organized an event in the town's main square to raise funds with live music and food stalls. Ethan, excited, played the guitar during the event, dedicating each song to his sister's strength. "This is for Emily, who taught us what it really means to fight," he said into the microphone, before beginning to play a melody that brought everyone present to tears. The support of the town not only brought resources, but also renewed the family's hopes. They realized that they were not alone, and that people's love and empathy were as important as any treatment. A few days after the event, Grace and Ethan returned to the hospital with the news of the fundraising. When they entered Emily's room, she greeted them with a shy smile, which in itself was a victory. "Emily, we have so many good things to tell you," said Grace excitedly. "The whole town is supporting you." Emily looked at her mother with eyes shining with emotion and whispered slowly, "Thank you." However, the most impactful moment came during the physical therapy session that afternoon. The physical therapist brought a walker to try to help Emily stand up. Ethan was by her side, while Grace watched with her heart in her mouth. "Let's try it, sweetheart," said Grace, taking Emily's hand with effort. Emily held on to Grace's hand with all her strength. Walker, to try to help Emily stand up. Ethan was by her side, while Grace watched with her heart in her throat. "Let's try it, sweetheart," said Grace, taking Emily's hand with effort. Emily held on to the walker, her arms and legs visibly shaking, but with the help of the physical therapist and the emotional support of her family, she managed to take her first step. The room fell completely silent for a moment, until Ethan shouted, "She did it, Mom! She did it!" Grace brought her hands to her face, tears streaming freely as she watched her daughter take another step, and then another. The effort was enormous, but Emily's determination shone brighter than ever. "You're incredible, girl!" exclaimed Grace, hugging Emily gently as she sat down to rest. Even Dr. Morales, who had come to observe the progress, seemed moved. "Emily, you are proof that the strength of the heart overcomes any obstacle," he said with a smile. Night was quiet at Grace's house, a temporary refuge for her and Ethan between the long hours at the hospital. Ethan was already asleep in the next room, but Grace couldn't sleep. She decided to organize an old drawer in her room, one she hadn't touched since her husband passed away. When she opened the drawer, she was surprised to find a yellowed envelope with handwriting she would recognize anywhere. It was her husband's. Husband. The inscription on the envelope simply read, "For Emily, when I need it." Grace felt a knot in her heart as she carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written with love and simplicity, like everything her husband did. "My dear Emily, I want you to know that from the day you were born, I knew you were special. You have a light inside you, something that no one can extinguish, not even life's challenges. Remember, true strength lies in never giving up. No matter how many times you fall, the important thing is to always find a way to get back up. You have your mother's courage, your brother's heart, and a spirit that can never be broken. I believe in you, my daughter. I have always believed, and I know you will be able to overcome anything because you are our strength. With all my love, Dad." Grace's tears began to fall before she could finish reading every word. It seemed to be written not only for Emily, but also for her, as if her husband knew this moment would come the next day. Grace took the letter to the hospital. She entered Emily's room with the envelope in her hand, her heart overflowing with emotion. Ethan was already sitting there next to his sister, as he did every morning. "My girl, I found something your dad left for you," Grace said, taking Emily's hand as she showed her the envelope. Emily looked at the letter, and her eyes filled with curiosity and excitement. Grace began to read each word, loaded with meaning. When she finished, silence filled the room. Grace saw tears running down Emily's face, and Ethan was also moved. "I always knew, didn't I?" Ethan said, his voice trembling. "I always knew you were the strongest of us." Grace tenderly cupped Emily's face. "My girl, your daddy believed in you, and so do I. You've been so brave, so strong, and I know he would be so proud of you." Emily slowly moved her lips, forming words that, though weak, were full of meaning. "I love Dad." Grace hugged her gently, letting the tears fall without concern. Ethan put his hand on his sister's shoulder, his face full of determination. "And now we're going to keep fighting, Emily, because that's what he wanted, and we'll do it together, like always." Months had passed since Emily took her first steps with the walker. Her recovery, though slow, was a testament of her strength, her family's dedication, and the support of the entire community. When a local event dedicated to overcoming adversity and hope invited Emily to share her story, Grace hesitated to accept. "Are you sure she's ready?" she asked the organizer, holding the invitation with trembling hands. "Emily, Grace's daughter. Emily's story has touched so many people. Hearing it directly from her will be a gift for everyone." Emily, overhearing the conversation, whispered, "I want to go." Grace. She looked at her daughter with surprise, but also with deep pride. On the day of the event, the auditorium was full. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers who had heard about Emily's story were present. Ethan was by her side, helping her into her wheelchair on stage, while Grace watched with tears beginning to well up in her eyes. Silence filled the room when Emily, microphone in hand, began to speak. Her voice still carried a strength that transcended words. "Good afternoon. I am Emily." She paused, taking a deep breath while the audience waited attentively. "A year ago, I thought it was all over. I couldn't move or speak. I could only hear, but I was never alone." She looked at Grace and Ethan, who watched her with emotional smiles. "My mom, my brother, my family never gave up, even though I gave up sometimes." The room fell completely silent as some people discreetly wiped away their tears. "I learned something important. True strength is not in doing everything alone. It is in accepting the love of those around us. Never underestimate the power of love." When it was over, the audience exploded in applause and cheers. Grace could no longer hold back her tears, while Ethan applauded with all his might. Emily looked at the audience, but her eyes soon turned to her mother and brother. They were the reason for her struggle, for her survival. As the applause continued, a tear ran slowly down her face. It was not a tear of sadness or pain, but of gratitude, of love, of a life reborn through the strength of a united family. Ethan approached her, kneeling beside her. "I am so proud of you." Emily took his hand as she also approached, enveloping them both in an embrace. Seeing the scene, the audience began to applaud again, but this time more softly, respecting the intimate moment of that family. Emily's tear illuminated by the stage lights as her voice echoed in one last thought. "Thank you for never giving up on me." The audience stood up in unison, applauding as the family left the stage together, stronger than ever. The sound of applause and tears of joy seemed to echo like a message. Even in the deepest adversity, love can be the greatest miracle of all. What would you do in Grace's place if you could keep hope alive like she did? Or if you were in Ethan's place, would you stand by your sister through all the difficult times? Tell us here in the comments. We want to know how you would face such a challenging and love-filled story. Don't forget to activate the bell so you'll receive our next videos and continue to enjoy exciting stories like this one that warm the heart and make us reflect on the power of love and overcoming adversity. Click on the video that appears here on the screen. It's such a moving story that it has made many people cry and rethink their lives. Get your tissues ready, because you're going to be moved.